You know what's crazy? Sometimes the most important stories hide in the most ordinary places, like in a dusty old box at an auction. Let me tell you about something incredible that happened. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Dr. Michael Parker walked slowly through the crowded auction room, tables everywhere, piled high with old stuff nobody wanted anymore. He was 43 years old, and for 20 years he'd been hunting for treasures. Not gold or jewels. Historical treasures, things that told stories about African American families after the Civil War. Most days, he found nothing special, just old dishes, fake antiques, stuff people threw away. But today felt different. He stopped at a cardboard box. The label said, "Miscellaneous Photographs, 1880s, 1920s, $15 for the whole thing." Inside, under crumbling old newspapers, his fingers touched leather. A portfolio. He opened it, and his breath just stopped. The photograph was stunning, not because it was pretty, but because it was perfect, like it had been taken yesterday instead of over 100 years ago. A black family stared back at him. 5 people, a father in a dark suit with a fancy pocket watch, a mother in a high-collared dress with beautiful lace, 3 young men in matching vests and ties, all dressed up, all serious. The studio stamp on the bottom said everything he needed to know. Photography Studio, 1895. Michael's heart started beating faster. Photos of black families from this time were super rare, especially ones in this good condition, but something else caught his eye. Something weird. The oldest son stood on the right side of the photo, really stiff. His left hand rested against his vest, but his fingers, they were arranged in a really strange way, too strange to be an accident. "How much for the photo box?" Michael asked the worker, trying to sound casual, like it didn't matter. $15 for everything, the guy said. Michael paid fast, tucked the portfolio under his arm, walked out. Outside, the September afternoon felt electric, like something big was about to happen. In his car, Michael looked at the image again, in natural light this time. That hand position wasn't random. No way. The fingers formed a deliberate shape, too precise, too careful. He'd seen gestures like this before, in old documents about secret organizations. His mind raced with possibilities as he drove to his office. The photograph felt alive in his hands, like it had been waiting all these years to tell its story. Michael didn't know it yet, but he'd just found something that would take over his life for the next 6 months and rewrite a forgotten chapter of American history. The family in that frame had secrets, and their oldest son had left a message that traveled through time itself. Michael's office overlooked Monument Avenue, where old stone statues of generals watched over the city. He cleared his entire desk, laid the photograph under his professional magnifying lamp. The detail under magnification was extraordinary, every thread of fabric, every strand of hair, crystal clear. Those photographers were masters. He focused on the oldest son's hand. The young man looked about 25, smart eyes, strong jaw, but that hand held Michael's attention. The thumb and pointer finger touched at the tips, making a small circle. The middle finger pointed straight up. The ring finger and pinky curved toward his palm. Michael photographed the gesture from every angle, then turned to his reference library. For 3 hours, he searched. Books on Victorian photography, body language, old customs, nothing matched. Then he pulled down an old book, worn and dusty, Secret Societies and Post-Reconstruction America. He flipped through chapters, Masonic traditions, labor unions, immigrant groups, until he reached a section that made him sit up straight. African American fraternal orders and their coded communications. The Grand United Order of Odd Fellows, the black branch of a big organization. They'd set up lodges all over the South after the Civil War. These groups did important stuff. They provided life insurance, burial assistance, financial support when banks refused to help black customers, but they also did something else. They protected people. The book explained how members used hand signals, secret signs to recognize each other in public, where openly associating could be dangerous, where it could get you killed. Michael compared the photograph to a blurry illustration in the book. The similarity was unmistakable. The oldest son was making the sign of a worthy master, a high-ranking officer in the order. His heart pounded. This wasn't just a family portrait. It was a declaration of identity, captured in a moment when such declarations could cost everything. But why would someone risk displaying this so openly? Why preserve it in a photograph that anyone could see? He needed more information. Michael grabbed his phone, called William Thompson, a genealogist who specialized in African-American family histories. "William, I need your help tracking a family from 1895. I have a photograph, but no names." "Send me what you've got," William replied. "But Michael, you sound excited. What did you find?" Michael looked at the photograph again, at the young man's deliberate gesture frozen in time. "I think I found someone who was trying to tell us something. I just need to figure out what, and why it was important enough to risk everything." William Thompson's office was chaos, filing cabinets everywhere, digitized records, wall-mounted family tree charts. When Michael arrived the next morning, William already had documents spread across 3 tables. "I started with the photography studio," William explained, pointing to an old city directory from 1895. They operated on Broad Street from 1889 to 1903. They kept client ledgers, and the public library has them on microfilm. They spent the afternoon in the library's archive room, scrolling through pages of elegant handwriting. Most entries were simple: names, dates, payment amounts. Then, on October 12, 1895, Michael found it. Family portrait. Robert, father; Elizabeth, mother; Samuel, 25; Benjamin, 21; Joseph, 15. Payment, £350. Address, 412, Clay Street. His hands trembled as he wrote down the information. Back at William's office, they pulled the 1900 census. The address on Clay Street showed a different family living there, no record of Robert, Elizabeth, or their sons. "They moved," William said, "or something happened to them. They expanded the search to surrounding counties. Nothing. They checked death records, property transfers, marriage licenses. The family seemed to have vanished between 1895 and 1900. "Let me try something else," William said, turning to his computer. He accessed a database of African-American newspapers from that time period, the Planet newspaper, the Journal and Guide. He searched for the names individually. After 20 minutes, he stopped scrolling. "Michael, look at this. The newspaper, November 2nd, 1895, page 3. Local businessman Robert and family departed suddenly last week. Sources indicate threats from unknown parties forced the family's relocation. Community leaders expressed concern over increasing tensions." Michael leaned closer to the screen. "It doesn't give their last name." "No," William agreed. Papers often protected identities when reporting on racial violence, but the timing matches. 3 weeks after the photograph, they kept searching, found another mention in the December 14th, 1895 edition. "We have received word that the family of Robert, formerly of Clay Street, has settled safely in Philadelphia. Their courage in the face of persecution will not be forgotten. Philadelphia." Michael felt the investigation shift into focus. "We need to search Pennsylvania records now. If they settled there, maybe they stayed. Maybe there are descendants." William nodded slowly. "This is bigger than just identifying a photograph, isn't it?" Michael looked at the image on his phone screen. The young man with his deliberate hand signal. The family dressed in their finest clothes, faces calm despite whatever storm was approaching. "I think this family knew they were in danger when they took this picture. I think the oldest son left us a message. And I think we need to find out what happened to them." The train to Philadelphia took 5 hours. Michael spent the journey reviewing everything. The photograph, the newspaper clippings, notes on fraternal organizations. He'd called ahead to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. A research librarian named Dr. Sharon Miller agreed to meet him. When he arrived at the building on Locust Street, Dr. Miller was waiting, several boxes already pulled from the archives. "I found multiple Robert families arriving in Philadelphia from Virginia between 1895 and 1900, she explained, gesturing to the documents. "But when you mentioned the Grand United Order of Oddfellows, that narrowed it considerably." She opened a leather-bound ledger. "This is the membership registry for Lodge Number 75, one of the largest Black Oddfellows chapters in Philadelphia. Look here." 1896. Michael scanned the page until he saw it. Robert Mitchell transferred from Richmond Lodge number 42, accompanied by wife Elizabeth and sons Samuel, Benjamin, Joseph. Samuel Mitchell confirmed as worthy master. "Mitchell," Michael whispered. "That's them. That's the family." Dr. Miller nodded. "And there's more." Samuel Mitchell became very active in the Philadelphia chapter. He's mentioned in meeting minutes regularly through 1897, then she flipped forward several pages. Then his name disappears. February 1898. No death record in the lodge books, no transfer notice, just gone. Michael felt a chill. What about the rest of the family? The younger sons continued as members for years. Benjamin became a teacher, Joseph a postal worker, both documented in city directories. Robert and Elizabeth lived until the 1920s. But Samuel, she pulled out a thin file folder. This was filed separately. It's a letter from Elizabeth Mitchell to the lodge secretary, dated March 1898. Michael opened the folder carefully. The letter was written in precise, elegant handwriting. "To the worthy secretary, it is with profound grief that I inform the brotherhood of my son Samuel's disappearance. He departed our home on February 14th to attend what he believed was an emergency lodge meeting. He never returned. Police have found no trace. We fear the worst, though we continue to hope and pray. His father and brothers ask that the lodge remember Samuel in their work, as he gave everything for the principles we hold dear. Yours in fellowship, Elizabeth Mitchell." The reading room was silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock. Michael read the letter twice more. An emergency meeting that didn't exist. Someone lured him out. Dr. Miller pulled out another document. There's a follow-up in the lodge, minutes from April 1898. The brothers voted to investigate Samuel's disappearance privately. They were concerned that involving authorities might expose the lodge's activities, specifically their work helping families escape racial violence in other cities. Michael's mind raced. The hand signal in the photograph. He was declaring his position as worthy master. But why make it so visible? Maybe, Dr. Miller said quietly. He knew that photograph might be the only proof he ever existed. Maybe he knew what was coming. Dr. Miller led Michael to a climate-controlled vault in the basement. The Grand United Order of Oddfellows kept meticulous records, she explained, unlocking a heavy door. But some of those records were deliberately obscured. They used coded language to document their most sensitive activities. She pulled out a box labeled Lodge 75, Administrative Correspondence, 1890-1900. Inside were letters, telegrams, handwritten reports. Michael spent hours reading through them, Dr. Miller translating the coded phrases. Safe arrival meant a family had been successfully relocated from a dangerous situation. Brotherhood assistance referred to financial support. Special protective measures indicated cases where violence was imminent. The lodge wasn't just a social club, it was an underground network, protecting black families from lynching, arson, forced displacement. One letter from September 1895 caught Michael's attention, addressed to Brother Robert M., signed by the Philadelphia Lodge Master. "We acknowledge your urgent communication regarding increased tensions. Preparations are being made for your family's arrival should circumstances require immediate departure. Your son's leadership has been noted, and his skills will be invaluable to our broader mission. Trust that brotherhood extends beyond geography." Michael showed it to Dr. Miller. This was written a month before the photograph. They were already planning to leave Richmond. And Samuel wasn't just fleeing, she added. He was being recruited. "Look at this." She handed him a report dated January 1896, 3 months after the family's arrival in Philadelphia. Brother Samuel Mitchell has successfully coordinated the safe relocation of 3 families from North Carolina. His experience with rapid evacuation protocols and his understanding of railroad timetables proved essential. The picture was becoming clearer. Samuel Mitchell had been a conductor of sorts, not on the Underground Railroad of the slavery era, but on a new network, helping families escape Jim Crow terror. Michael found more references. Families moved from Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi, all with Samuel's name attached to the operations. The young man in the photograph had been far more than a lodge member. He had been a lifeline, but then in late 1897, the tone of the documents changed, a coded telegram from a contact back home. Former associates asking questions about SM. Stop. Suggest suspended operations. Stop. Safety compromised. Another from January 1898. Rumors of infiltration. Trust no emergency communications not verified through primary channels. Dr. Miller and Michael exchanged glances. Someone was looking for him, Michael said. Someone who wanted him stopped. They found one final document in the box, a brief note dated March 1898. Unsigned. The brother we have lost gave everything to protect others. His absence creates a void that cannot be filled. We must honor his sacrifice by continuing the work, even as we grieve what has been taken from us. Michael sat back in his chair. Samuel Mitchell had disappeared because he'd been too effective, too visible. The hand signal in the photograph wasn't just identification, it was defiance. It was a young man saying, "This is who I am, this is what I stand for, and I will not hide." Back home, Michael couldn't stop thinking about Samuel Mitchell, a 25-year-old who had risked everything, who had saved families, who had vanished without a trace. He needed to know if anyone remembered him, if any descendants existed who might hold pieces of the story. William Thompson had been working the family triangle. When Michael called him, William sounded energized. "I found them," William said. "Benjamin Mitchell's line. He married in 1902, had 4 children. The family stayed in Philadelphia for generations. I've got a living great-granddaughter, Dr. Grace Davis. She's a retired professor in Philadelphia, and she's willing to talk to you." Michael booked another train ticket immediately. Dr. Grace Davis lived in a brownstone in West Philadelphia, the front room filled with bookshelves and family photographs. She was 78, silver hair, eyes that held both warmth and careful assessment. "My grandfather told me stories about his Uncle Samuel," she said, gesturing for Michael to sit. But the family never talked about him openly. There was always this sense that his name carried danger. Michael showed her the 1895 photograph. Grace held it gently, tears forming in her eyes. "I've never seen this. Never. We have pictures of Robert and Elizabeth, of Benjamin and Joseph in their later years, but nothing from Richmond, nothing from before they left." She traced Samuel's face with her finger. "Grandfather said Samuel was brilliant, that he could have done anything, been a lawyer, a doctor, but he chose to help people instead." "What else did your grandfather say?" Michael asked carefully. Grace was quiet for a moment, then stood and walked to a desk in the corner. She unlocked a drawer, pulled out a worn journal. "This belonged to Benjamin. He wrote in it sporadically throughout his life. After he died, my mother gave it to me. There are entries about Samuel." She opened to a page marked with a ribbon. "May I read it to you?" Michael nodded. Grace's voice was steady but emotional. "I dream of Samuel often. I see him as he was that last morning. Confident and purposeful, telling Mother he would return by evening. He never doubted the rightness of what he did, saving families, standing against those who would destroy us. Father says Samuel knew the risks, that he chose them willingly. I am proud to have called him brother, and ashamed that I was not brave enough to walk beside him into danger." Michael felt the weight of those words. "Did Benjamin ever learn what happened?" "No," Grace said, closing the journal. "The family searched for years. They hired investigators, contacted police in multiple cities, reached out through the Lodge network. Nothing. It was as though Samuel had been erased from existence." She paused. "But there was one thing. A package arrived at the family's home in 1910, 12 years after Samuel disappeared. No return address. Postmarked from Washington, D.C. "What was in it?" Michael asked. Grace opened the drawer again, carefully lifted out a small wooden box. She handed it to Michael. Inside, wrapped in aged cloth, was a bronze medallion, the official emblem of a Grand United Order of Oddfellows Worthy Master, engraved on the back. SM 1895. "This was Samuel's," Grace said. "Someone kept it for 12 years, then sent it home. No note, no explanation, just this." Michael held the medallion, feeling its weight. Someone had known. Someone had wanted the family to have this piece of Samuel back. Michael spent the next week in archives across 3 cities. In Washington, D.C., he found newspaper reports from 1898 about unidentified bodies pulled from the river. None matched Samuel's description. In Baltimore, he searched police records for missing persons cases. Nothing. The young man had vanished as thoroughly as if he'd never existed, but Michael had learned enough about Samuel Mitchell to know something. His disappearance wasn't random, it was targeted, planned, executed by people who wanted to stop the lodge's rescue operations. What haunted Michael most was the photograph. Why take such a formal, expensive portrait just weeks before fleeing? He returned to Dr. Miller in Philadelphia with a new question. Could the photograph itself have been a warning? A message to other lodge members? Dr. Miller pulled out the original lodge correspondence again. Let me check something. She searched through letters until she found one dated October 1895. The same month the photograph was taken. Listen to this, she said. It's from Robert Mitchell to the Philadelphia Lodge Master. We have created a record of our family as it stands today. Should circumstances separate us, this image will serve as testament to who we were and what we stood for. My eldest son wishes it known that he serves the Brotherhood with full knowledge of the costs. Michael felt his pulse quicken. They knew when they walked into that photography studio. They knew they might not all survive what was coming. There's more, Dr. Miller continued. The Richmond Lodge was under surveillance by white supremacist groups throughout 1895. There are references in these letters to watchers and informants. Robert and his family weren't just members, they were visible leaders. Their home was a meeting place. Samuel personally coordinated relocations for families being threatened. She pulled out a telegram. Clay Street address compromised. Immediate evacuation recommended. Richmond, brother. October 20th, 1895, 8 days after the photograph. The family had fled days after having their portrait taken. It wasn't just a family photo, Michael said slowly. It was evidence, proof that they existed, that they stood together. If they died, this would remain. Dr. Miller nodded, and Samuel's hand signal in the photograph. It's clear, deliberate. Anyone who knew the signs would understand immediately. This man is a worthy master. This man has authority. This man is not backing down. Michael thought about the families Samuel had saved, the families in North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, who had made it to safety because a 25-year-old had coordinated trains, safe houses, resources. How many people owed their lives to him, and how many enemies had he made in the process? I think I know why he disappeared, Michael said. Someone needed to make an example of him. Someone wanted to send a message to other lodge members. This is what happens when you help people escape. Dr. Miller was quiet for a moment, but they failed, didn't they? The lodge kept operating. Samuel's brothers continued the work. The network survived. She looked at the photograph of the Mitchell family, frozen in time. He won. They couldn't erase what he built, no matter what they did to him. Michael returned home with a new determination. If Samuel Mitchell had been targeted, there would be records, threats, incidents, something in the white supremacist group's own documentation. He contacted Dr. Victor Hayes, a historian at the university, who specialized in Reconstruction-era racial violence. I need access to records of organizations like the Red Shirts and White League, 1890s, specifically anything about the Grand United Order of Oddfellows. Dr. Hayes's expression was grim. Those records exist, but they're disturbing. Are you sure you want to go down this path? I need to understand what Samuel Mitchell was facing, Michael said. I need to know what he stood against. 2 days later, Michael sat in a locked archive room, reading documents that made his hands shake. Letters between white supremacist leaders discussed the Negro fraternal problem, strategies for disrupting their organizational networks. One letter from September 1895 specifically mentioned the Mitchell family and their dangerous influence. But it was a journal entry that provided the clearest picture. Written in November 1895, it detailed an attack plan for the Clay Street address, an attack that never happened because the family had already fled. The writer expressed frustration. The eldest son, Samuel, was the primary target. His escape denies us the opportunity to demonstrate the consequences of their insolence. Michael photographed the page with trembling hands. This was proof. Samuel hadn't just disappeared. He had been hunted. He continued searching, found a name that appeared repeatedly in connection with investigations into Samuel's whereabouts. Henry Cooper, a private investigator who worked for white business owners. Cooper's reports tracked Samuel's movements in Philadelphia through 1896 and 1897. The final report, dated February 1898, was chilling in its brevity. Subject located. Meeting arranged through false lodge communication. Contract fulfilled. Michael sat back, feeling sick. Samuel had been lured to what he thought was a lodge emergency and walked into a trap. The 12-year gap before his medallion was returned suggested something. Someone's conscience had finally broken. Perhaps someone who had participated, who had kept the medallion as proof, and who finally decided the family deserved to know. Samuel had existed, had mattered. Michael gathered copies of everything, called Grace Davis. "I found answers," he told her. "Not all of them. I don't know where Samuel's buried or exactly how he died, but I know why. I know what he stood for and why they feared him." "Tell me," Grace said. Michael spent an hour explaining everything: the rescue network, the surveillance, the planned attack on Clay Street, the targeted assassination. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then Grace spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "My grandfather was right. Samuel chose this. He knew the dangers and chose to stand anyway." She paused. "Dr. Parker, what happens now? Does this story just go back into the archives?" Michael looked at the photograph on his desk. The Mitchell family dressed in their finest, facing a future they knew might destroy them. "No," he said, "this story needs to be told. People need to know what Samuel Mitchell did, what all of them did." Michael spent 3 months writing. He contacted the Virginia Historical Society, the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, the national headquarters of the Grand United Order of Oddfellows. He proposed an exhibition and published research paper. The Mitchell Family and the Secret Network, Fraternal Organizations and Resistance in Post-Reconstruction America. The response was immediate, overwhelming. Historians, genealogists, descendants of other lodge members, they all reached out with their own stories, their own photographs, their own family secrets. The exhibition opened on a Saturday morning in April at the Virginia Historical Society. The centerpiece was the 1895 Mitchell family photograph, professionally restored and enlarged. Beside it, Michael had arranged documents, letters, lodge records, Benjamin's journal entries. A timeline traced Samuel's rescue operations. A map showed the network of safe houses, railroad routes used to relocate threatened families. The room was packed. Historians, students, community leaders, and most importantly, descendants. Grace Davis stood before her great-great-uncle's photograph, with her extended family. 19 people who had traveled from Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago. Many were seeing Samuel's face for the first time. Grace's nephew, a high school history teacher named Andre Davis, stood beside Michael. "My students are going to learn about this," he said quietly. "They're going to know that resistance didn't end with abolition. That courage looked like this: a family posing for a photograph they knew might be their last, refusing to hide who they were." Michael watched as visitors moved through the exhibition, reading the documents, studying the photographs. A college student stopped in front of Samuel's image, stared at the hand signal for several minutes. An elderly woman wiped tears as she read Elizabeth Mitchell's letter about her son's disappearance. A father explained to his young daughter what the Grand United Order of Oddfellows had done, why it had mattered. The local news covered the opening. The story spread through academic journals, genealogy forums, social media. Other families came forward with similar photographs, similar hand signals, similar stories of ancestors who had been part of the secret network. A researcher from North Carolina contacted Michael with evidence that one of the families Samuel had saved had gone on to establish a successful black-owned business that still operated today. 4 generations of prosperity, built on the foundation of one young man's courage. Dr. Miller called with news. The Grand United Order of Oddfellows was creating a memorial program to honor members like Samuel who had disappeared while protecting others. "They're calling it the Mitchell Initiative," she told Michael. "Your research made this possible." But the moment that affected Michael most came 3 weeks after the opening. A man in his 80s approached him at the exhibition, moving slowly with a cane. "My grandmother was one of the families your Samuel Mitchell saved," he said, 1897, from Georgia. "She was 9 years old. She lived to be 93, saw her children and grandchildren grow up free and safe. She used to say an angel helped them escape. Now I know his name." Michael shook the man's hand, unable to speak. This was why history mattered. This was why photographs like the Mitchells had to be preserved, studied, understood, because behind every formal portrait was a human story, and some of those stories had the power to change how we understood courage itself. 6 months after the exhibition opened, Michael received a call from a National Park Service historian. The house at 412 Clay Street, the Mitchell family home, still stood, though it had been divided into apartments decades ago. The Park Service wanted to explore designating it as a historic site, part of a broader initiative to preserve locations significant to African American resistance and community organizing. Michael stood on the front steps of the house. On a cool October morning, the same month the Mitchells had taken their photograph. And years earlier, the building needed work. The facade was crumbling. Windows were broken, but the bones were solid. He imagined Robert and Elizabeth inside, hosting lodge meetings. He imagined young Samuel coordinating rescue operations from these rooms, writing telegrams in code, planning routes north. This had been a place of courage. Grace Davis joined him, along with 12 other Mitchell descendants. They had come from across the country for this moment. The Park Service representative explained the restoration plans. The building would house a research center, dedicated to studying fraternal organizations' role in protecting black communities during Jim Crow. One room would be permanently devoted to Samuel Mitchell and the rescue network he had built. "We're also working with the Oddfellows National Organization," the representative continued. "They're funding scholarships in Samuel's name for students studying African American history and social justice." Grace smiled through tears. He would have loved that, using his story to help others learn, to help them fight their own battles. Michael thought about his first moment seeing the photograph at that estate auction, how a $15 box of miscellaneous items had led to all of this, how a hand signal frozen in time had unlocked a story of networks, sacrifice, resistance that spanned cities and saved lives. The photograph itself now resided in the permanent collection of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. Millions of visitors each year would see the Mitchell family, Robert and Elizabeth, Samuel and Benjamin and Joseph, standing together in their finest clothes, facing the camera with dignity and defiance, and they would read Samuel's story. They would understand what that hand signal meant. They would know that in 1895, being brave sometimes meant posing for a photograph and declaring to the world exactly who you were, knowing that declaration might cost you everything. As Michael stood on Clay Street, he received a text from Dr. Miller. Attached was a photograph of a new historical marker being installed in Philadelphia at the site of Lodge 75. Here stood a sanctuary of the Grand United Order of Oddfellows, where Samuel Mitchell and countless others worked in secret to protect families fleeing racial terror. Their courage saved lives. Their legacy endures. Michael showed the photo to Grace. She read it slowly, then looked up at the house. Samuel was 25 when he disappeared, just 25. And look what he built. Look what he did. Look what he continues to do, Michael corrected gently. Your family's story is teaching people right now. Students, researchers, families discovering their own histories. Samuel's work didn't end when he disappeared. It's still happening. As the sun set, Michael took one final photograph of the Clay Street house. Later, he would add it to the exhibition. Past and present connected, a building that had witnessed both terror and triumph, now being reclaimed as a symbol of the resistance that had flourished within its walls. The mystery of the 1895 photograph had been solved. But more than that, a man who had been deliberately erased from history had been restored. Samuel Mitchell's name would be remembered, his courage would inspire, and the hand signal he had made in that studio one October day, the declaration of who he was and what he stood for, would never be forgotten again. Some photographs are just images, others are testimonies, and a very few are messages sent across time, waiting for someone to finally understand what they mean. This portrait from 1895 had held its secret for more than a century. Now at last the world knew the truth.